Here before me, I have a standard household glass jar. And now I'm going to turn that jar into a running, working engine by making only one single modification to that jar. And that modification is to drill a hole in the lid. Okay, hole has been drilled. Now we're going to add some fuel. And there you have it, a running, working engine. Yes, it was very fragile and very short-lived, but it ran, and it did really well for what is just a glass jar with a hole in the lid. Now, what we just made has a name, and it's called a valveless pulsejet engine. Now, this is a very primitive version of it, but it begs the question, what if we didn't use a fragile glass jar? What if we made it from metal? Of course, many people already had the exact same idea. Now, the amazing thing about valveless pulsejets is that they are the simplest known engines. They are just a hollow pipe with varying shape and diameter. That's it. There are zero moving parts, just like our little glass jar. But despite their extremely simple anatomy, valveless pulsejets can be one of the most difficult engines to properly and fully understand and explain. And that's because inside of them they have three distinct separated processes that occur simultaneously to ensure the successful and continued operation of the engine. The first process is the fluid dynamics influenced by the combustion of the air-fuel mixture inside the engine. The second process is acoustics, or sound waves created by the combustion, which also greatly impact the performance of the engine. And the final third process is thermodynamics, or the rapid heating and cooling of the gases inside the engine, which also contribute to its operation. As you can see, there's a lot of stuff going on, which makes it kind of complicated, but we're going to explain all of it in this video step by step. And I promise that if you take the time to understand it, you will gain a newfound multidisciplinary appreciation for the amazing things that physics can do, even with zero moving parts. So this is the pulsejet design we'll be using for our explanation. There are all sorts of different pulsejet designs out there, but this one, known as the Lockwood-Hiller, which comes from the early 60s, is sort of a culmination of 100 years of trial and error and is probably the most popular design by far today. And that's because it offers a really nice balance of ease of starting, thrust, efficiency, and reliability. Here we have the main parts of the engine: the intake, the exhaust, and the combustion chamber. To start the engine, we need to add fuel. In most cases, this will be propane from a tank that will be injected either directly into the combustion chamber or in front of the engine at the intake. We'll also install a spark plug inside the combustion chamber. The spark plug is needed only during the starting phase and is not used later. So let's imagine we have opened our propane valve and allowed fuel into the chamber. Because the engine is a hollow tube, we already have air inside it, which means that now we have an air-fuel mixture in the chamber. We ignite that air-fuel mixture, which causes it to combust. It's important to note that we are creating deflagration here, just like inside a piston engine, a controlled, rapidly and evenly spreading subsonic combustion event that dramatically increases the temperature and pressure around it. We do not have detonation here. Detonation is uncontrolled, damaging, and supersonic. As the combustion flame front expands, it increases the pressure and temperature dramatically. This expansion of the combustion forces and accelerates the masses of air in the intake and the exhaust of the engine. Now, a jet engine is a reaction engine. As you know, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So by accelerating the air mass in one direction, the reactionary force moves the engine in the other direction. And if we attach that engine onto something, that something will move together with the engine. One of the reasons why the exhaust is larger than the intake is so that it can contain a larger air mass. Most earlier pulsejet engine designs had the intake and the exhaust in opposite directions. A greater air mass in the exhaust ensured that the engine created most of the thrust from the exhaust and moved in the desired direction. The Lockwood-Hiller design, as you can see, points both the intake and the exhaust in the same direction. Although the thrust created by the small air mass of the intake is small compared to the thrust of the exhaust air mass, it is still an efficiency improvement to direct both sources of thrust in the same direction, because it's better to add the thrust of the intake to the thrust of the exhaust rather than to subtract one from the other. Something else that's important to note here is the shape of the chamber and the intake pipe. As you can see, the chamber diverges towards the exhaust, and the intake itself converges. This makes the exhaust pathway the path of least resistance, which ensures that most of the energy generated by combustion is in fact used in accelerating the larger air mass. Okay, once the combustion has consumed the air and fuel in the chamber, we find ourselves in a position where we have a mass of hot exhaust gas trying to find its way out of the engine. As we have two exits from the engine, the exhaust gas will move in both directions. As the exhaust gas is very hot and packed with energy, it of course moves very rapidly. Because we're very rapidly displacing the mass of gas present inside the combustion chamber out of it, we are creating a vacuum inside the combustion chamber. This is of course not a perfect vacuum, it's a partial vacuum, just like inside a piston engine. And a partial vacuum means that we temporarily have air pressure inside the chamber that is below atmospheric. Usually inside the combustion chamber of a pulsejet, the lowest we will have is something between 0.6 to 0.7 bar, whereas outside in the atmosphere at sea level, we will have 1 bar. Now, because the intake pathway is much shorter than the exhaust pathway, it means that the exhaust gas moving through the intake pipe will escape into the atmosphere well before the exhaust gas traveling through the exhaust pipe. Once that happens, the partial vacuum inside the combustion chamber will be exposed to the atmosphere from the direction of the intake. And so air from the outside rushes into the engine through the intake. This abrupt step in the combustion chamber is important during this phase because it causes air turbulence here as the air enters into the chamber, and this turbulence improves the mixing of the air and fuel. Although exhaust gas has escaped out into the atmosphere through the intake, there is still a relatively large mass of hot exhaust gas in the exhaust pipe. Some of it will manage to escape into the atmosphere, but some of it will still remain in the exhaust pipe at the same time when we have peak vacuum, or the lowest air pressure inside the chamber. This vacuum means that some of the exhaust gas will actually be pulled back into the chamber at the same time when we have fresh air from the intake mixing with the fuel. Now remember, the exhaust gas is very hot, So the tail of the exhaust gas that we pull back into the chamber with our vacuum will actually ignite the air-fuel mixture, and the process starts all over. What's important to understand here is that there's always some exhaust gas in the exhaust pipe of a pulsejet. It remains trapped in the pipe and it's moving back and forth all the time as the engine is running. It is essentially pulsating back and forth in the exhaust pipe. And we use the tail of that exhaust gas to ignite the air-fuel mixture. We don't need a spark plug once the engine starts running because the exhaust gas is our spark plug. And if we actually try to ignite the air-fuel mixture with a spark plug once a pulsejet starts running, it would cause the pulsejet to either stall or run very poorly. And that's because it disturbs the natural breathing rhythm of the engine. This is the other reason why the exhaust pipe is so long. We want to prevent all the exhaust gas from escaping into the atmosphere by the time we have peak vacuum in the chamber and air and fuel coming into the chamber. We want to make sure that there's some exhaust gas still in that pipe that we can pull back in and use it to ignite the air-fuel mixture. The other important thing that has to be said here is that pulse jets are indeed jet engines, and that's because they create thrust with a jet of accelerated gas, just like a turbofan or a turbojet. But unlike a turbofan or a turbojet, a pulse jet is not a constant combustion engine. In a traditional jet engine, when we start the engine, combustion gets started and it never stops. We have a constant combustion event going on inside the combustion chamber, and it stops only when we stop the engine. A pulse jet in this regard is more like a reciprocating piston engine. It has individual separated combustion events. They occur rapidly one after the other, but they are all separated individual combustion events. And the frequency of these combustion events in a pulse jet depends on the anatomy and the size of the engine and the construction. And it can be as low as 40 combustions per second for large pulse jet engines, such as those used in German bus bombs in World War II, or it can be as high as 250 combustions per second for small hobby-grade pulse jets, such as those used in RC planes or other similar hobby aircraft. Okay, so now we have a basic understanding of how the engine operates and about the aerodynamics caused by the combustion inside the engine. Next, it's time to talk about the acoustics. And by acoustics, I mean the sound created by the combustion. And this sound itself plays a critical role in how well the engine runs and how much thrust it generates. A combustion event inside a pulse jet engine, of course, creates a very loud, powerful sound. And sound is a wave. And as you may remember from my video on two-stroke exhaust pipes, sound waves are essentially pressure waves. And pressure waves are just disturbances traveling through a medium. In this case, the gas inside the engine is our medium. But the sound waves are separate waves from the combustion and exhaust pulses of the engine. Sound waves are pressure waves that move at the local speed of sound, whereas combustion or deflagration is a subsonic phenomenon. This means that the sound wave or the pressure wave created by the combustion travels faster than the combustion flame front itself. So as our sound wave propagates outward from the combustion, part of the wave encounters the metal body of the engine. Most of it gets absorbed by the body, and a small part of it gets reflected back as a much weaker sound wave. But the part of the sound wave that encounters the intake and the exhaust rapidly proceeds outward and heads into the atmosphere. The sound wave created by the engine is a compressive pressure wave, or one that increases local gas pressure. As you can imagine, the combustion events and the presence of the hot exhaust gas inside the confines of the engine means that the gas is much more densely packed inside the engine than the air outside in the atmosphere. This makes the gas inside the engine a medium of high acoustic impedance, compared to the air outside the engine, which is a medium of lower acoustic impedance. Acoustic impedance is a medium's resistance to acoustic flow. The higher it is, the more difficult it is for a sound wave to propagate through that medium. In other words, a sound wave will exhaust more energy traveling through a medium with higher acoustic impedance. So our sound wave travels through the intake and the exhaust. Because the intake is shorter, it means that this sound wave reaches the atmosphere first. When that happens, our sound wave is transitioning from a medium of higher acoustic impedance to a medium of lower acoustic impedance. And when that happens, part of the sound wave will get reflected and it will undergo a phase change. A phase change means that a compressive or a positive pressure wave turns into an expansive or negative pressure wave, one that decreases local gas pressure. So now the positive wave has escaped into the atmosphere, while the negative pressure wave is traveling down the intake pipe towards the chamber. This is where the length of the intake pipe plays an important role. If the length is just right, we can time the arrival of the negative pressure wave into the combustion chamber just as the mass of the exhaust gas leaves the front of the intake and exposes the vacuum inside to the atmosphere. If the negative pressure wave also arrives at this time, it will further reduce the pressure inside the chamber, leading to a greater vacuum, which will lead to more air and fuel inside the chamber, which will effectively increase the compression ratio and the performance of the engine. The same thing, of course, happens on the exhaust side. The sound wave travels down the pipe, goes into the atmosphere, transitions from high to low acoustic impedance, negative pressure wave gets reflected back and travels back to the chamber. But because the exhaust pipe is longer, it takes more time for all of this to happen, so there's a little delay. But again, if we get the pipe length just right, we'll help to pull the tail off the exhaust gas back into the chamber to ignite the air-fuel mixture just at the right time after the mixture is fully and properly mixed to achieve maximum combustion pressure. Something else that's important to understand here is that pulse jets are similar to two-stroke engines in that both can operate without calculated or tuned pipe lengths. A two-stroke will run without an expansion chamber, but it will perform much better with it. Same goes for a pulse jet. If we get the pipe lengths right for our application, we'll produce more thrust than if we just used random pipe lengths. So we covered aerodynamics, we covered the acoustics, now it's time for thermodynamics, which is fortunately the easiest part. When combustion occurs inside a pulse jet, of course, it heats up all the gas inside the engine. When we heat up gas, the gas expands. As it expands, it eventually reaches the metal body of the engine, which has a very significant internal surface area. And the gas passes, it transfers heat onto that surface area, and as it transfers heat, it cools back down. And when the gas cools down, it contracts. So what is actually happening is something that the modern, probably the most important modern pioneer of pulsating combustion, a Swiss man by the name of Francois H. Reinst, he called this thermal breathing. The engine is essentially, the gas inside the engine is constantly expanding and contracting, expanding and contracting. The engine is breathing. When the gas expands, it of course helps to accelerate and push out air masses and create thrust. And when it contracts, it makes space for new fresh air to come in. This thermal breathing is especially important in our glass jar pulse jet engine because here we really don't have the proper dimensions for any sort of acoustics. But thermal breathing is a key factor for the proper operation, and it enables the functioning of pretty much all pulse jet engines. So if pulse jets are super simple because they have zero moving parts and they obviously create thrust, why aren't they more widespread? It seems like a great engine. Well, as you might expect from something which is essentially just a hollow pipe, we have some drawbacks. The first drawback is poor fuel efficiency. One of the reasons why we have poor fuel efficiency is that we ignite the air-fuel mixture with exhaust, which means that whenever we have combustion, we have a mixture of air, fuel, and exhaust in the engine, which means that we really can't achieve proper, very high combustion temperatures, and then because we don't have a lot of heat, we can't burn all the fuel, and there's leftover fuel in the engine, and we then just, when combustion happens, we just spit out that unburned fuel out from the engine. The other reason why we can't achieve good fuel efficiency and good thrust is that we don't do any compression inside a pulsejet. A turbojet or a turbofan, they have entire compressor sections in the engine consisting of multiple stators and rotors, and they can easily increase air pressure 5 times over or even more. A pulsejet only has atmospheric air pressure at its disposal, which means that when we do ignite the air-fuel mixture inside a pulsejet, we simply don't achieve the same kind of combustion temperature because we haven't compressed anything, and then when we don't have a lot of combustion temperature, we can't burn all the fuel, and because there's not enough combustion temperature, there's also not enough combustion pressure, which means that we have poor thrust. Finally, the intermittent nature of the pulsating combustion is simply inferior in terms of producing massive thrust compared to the constant combustion that occurs inside a turbofan or a turbojet. And there's yet another drawback. It's the noise. Pulsejets are incredibly loud. Nowadays, you can buy ready-made, ready-to-operate pulsejets. They're super fun, but if you do buy them and if you do decide to fire them up, I recommend that you do it very, very far away from populated areas. Despite their drawbacks, pulsejets are the simplest possible, most cost-effective, and most lightweight way of achieving propulsion or powered flight, which makes them ideal for RC planes and any other kind of unmanned aircraft. And there you have it, pulsejets, probably the simplest engine known to man. I hope you enjoyed that, and if you did, I'm pretty sure you're also going to enjoy Brilliant, which is a very visual and intuitive way of learning about all sorts of different concepts. Brilliant is a powerful tool that acts as a launch pad for creating fundamental thought processes that allow you to not only understand complex concepts and theories, but also to build mental networks that allow you to understand how these concepts and theories are correlated and how they influence each other. For example, if you're interested in data science or programming, Brilliant has a great number of exercises that can help you condition your mind and achieve progress even if you have very little or zero previous knowledge in math and related fields. Brilliant also adapts itself to your goals and available free time in order to create an individual program tailored to your specific needs and possibilities, which ensures that you stay on track and achieve your learning goals. You can try every single one of Brilliant's interactive and intuitive learning features completely free for a full 30 days if you go to brilliant.org/D4A. And if it turns out that it suits you and it helps you achieve learning progress, accessing Brilliant through this same link will also give you 20% off an annual premium subscription.